Austin.
Hey, Dad, how are you today?
I'm good. We're back at it. It seems like it's been a couple months since the two of us had some time to just talk about the things that Papa's put on our hearts. We've had so many unbelievable guests and their stories that sometimes you feel like, our time together gets put aside. So I'm excited for this morning. We're going to entertain something that when you first brought it up, I thought, man, my son is crazy. How are we going to talk about that? But the more we looked into it, which we'll discuss the topic a little bit here later, the more we looked into it, we saw how rich it is. And it's going to really be, I think, an encouragement to all those that listen to Awaken Kingdom Culture. So, but before we do that, let's recap just a little bit from our viewpoint of the last 3 weeks of, I guess, 4 guests, the last 4 guests since we have last talked. So why don't you maybe share a little bit about or share from your heart about some of the guests that we've had on?
Well, the first one was your wife and my mom, which for me, it was special because it was an opportunity to honor her. It was right before we went into Mother's Day, so it was a special way to just show her that we appreciate her and that, that I saw all that she had done. So for me as her son and all that she has done for me, it was just a good opportunity to highlight her life and what she's done, pouring into, I know, all of us, but specifically me.
It's when I think of Mom, to you, I'm in agreement with, what's been fun for me for the last 18 years as Mom shared her story of restoration. And really, I think it's even become more about love. It's to see her day to day, the joy in her life, to see the way she treats people. And I'm talking about just the people that cross her path on a daily basis. And to experience that picture of love in my own life and how it's encouraged me and challenged me to love people, sometimes difficult people. And so I know listening to Mom, it was, we've had a lot of great responses. I know it related to a lot of people that went through or are going through some of the same things she has. And just, again, highlighting that restoration that has occurred from some very difficult times. So it was awesome to have your mom and my best friend as one of our guests.
Well, me and my kids are reading through Genesis and Exodus, and we're getting into some of the other books like Leviticus. And well, back in Genesis, it finishes in Genesis 50:20. It talks about how, Joseph says what was meant for evil or for harm, God can turn for good. And that's something that I think that I've witnessed in just my mom's life, just the ability to take something that was very hard on her and the world has just beat her down, and her ability just to, over time, God has taken it and shown her the good things. So that was kind of what I took away from her podcast. The next one we went to was Tony Dungy, which is a very familiar name to, I'm sure, anyone who listens. For me, obviously, he's well known and he's got a wonderful story and he's just such a man of high character. The things that I took away was his conviction through challenging times and his decision to stay the course and to choose to try to coach the way he believed he was called and trained to coach, regardless of maybe things that he would miss out on or the opportunities he would get. And just his patience, because in time he ended up being one of the, he's a Hall of Fame coach and one of the greatest coaches out there. And it wouldn't have happened without his conviction and his patience.
When I think of Tony, Austin, as well, I mean, I have a pretty storied background with the guy going back to 1992, and I won't get into all the things that we've been through together, but just being able to look at in his story, which a lot of people know some of the things about his story, but what jumped out to me was, one, just the parental influence that his mom and dad had in his life. And he kept going back to that. And even, I think was very grateful and made some of those statements at the end about mom and dad's influence in his life. And then the other piece was just the transparency of his story, because I think people sometimes look at those that are out there in the limelight and they think they've got it all together or everything's perfect in their life. And, he got into the death of a child and some of the different things of not getting jobs, just like the normal people in the earth that, those that struggle and think, well, that's Tony Dungy. And then the other thing that really jumped out was just his relational approach to coaching. And he talked about how Chuck Noll influenced that. But, he's not a guy that says, hey, everyone fits my mold and you got to adjust to me. No, he adjusted to each person. So that parental influence, that transparency of his story and just his relational coaching style spoke to me.
Yeah. Then we went to Kerry Joseph, the quarterback coach of the Bears. And what timing, considering they just had the number 1 pick of the NFL draft, and who were they picking? A quarterback. And just the season that he's about to walk into, and the challenges that he's going to face, and the influence that he's going to have. But the things that I took away from our podcast with him was just his unique priority system. For me, just understanding, you got to take care of, yourself so that you can then go take care of other people. And then also his input on journaling. To me, I think being able to write your thoughts out and to get them out of your head so that they don't consume you, and having them somewhere just for your own sake. I think that's a good way to manage things that I know I've gone through, such as stress, anxiety, frustrations. And I think that could be a good tool to just help you be able to navigate those seasons of life. What do you think,
once again, once again, hey, I have an interesting background with him too. As he said in our podcast, it goes all the way back to 98. And some of the things that jumped out in that podcast to me, once again, was the role of his parents. And I think what I was getting from that, both he and Tony, it reminded me that it's not the people that are outside of our home that we're called to influence first. It's the people that are within the home that God has not only called us, but has uniquely prepared us, because he gave us you. He gave mom to me as a gift. And so it's the home that is so important. And I know there's so many challenges out there today in our society. And sometimes it's death, sometimes it's divorce. It's all these different things that we know the evil one tries to break up the home. But it just reminded me of the parental influence and the role that plays in those early years of life. So I encourage parents that are, whether it be a single mom or dad, or a couple that's married, or maybe it's a grandma or grandpa, that the most important people that we can impact in our life, and if it's the only people we impact in our life, is the home. And if that happens, we'll change the world, because the home is such an important place. So that spoke to me. And then just once again, his relational approach. He talked about just how he sees everyone the same. And, I know we chuckled with this first pick coming up, because he's going to experience a lot of pressure, because the Bears are going to expect them to win this year and to win quickly. And a lot's going to fall on Kerry. So I know he'll do a great job. And as I said to him at the end, I don't think Caleb Williams even has a clue of the gift he's getting in his coach of Kerry Joseph. And so it'll be fun to watch the Bears and see how Kerry can help impact Caleb's career.
Yeah. Then we moved to Kevin and Sean Malone, which was just such an inspirational story. And I'm currently reading his book and going through it again. And it's just, the thing that struck me was just, the passion of Kevin, and how he just is going, after, people that need his help, and his courage and his strength. And just his wisdom. And I also Sean, just his miraculous story, and just he's a walking miracle, and just watching God share his story through Sean was just real encouraging, uplifting, and definitely has impacted me over the last few weeks since we've talked with him.
Yeah, there's so many buzzwords, like you said, you could choose. I mean, it's a story. First of all, Kevin is a passionate man, and you'd have to be. He was the GM of the Dodgers and the Expos, and you don't get to those positions without some passion. And then it's a story of identity. Losing your identity to the addictions of life, whether it be, in his case, it was all about winning. I've mentioned in my past, it's about recognition. In Sean's case, it happened to be the drug abuse. And so, just that whole battle there. But like you said, I think the focus was on the miracle, which those of you that have not watched their podcast, it's SeanMiracle.com. I highly recommend you go see or go watch that. It's a 20-minute little documentary it's unbelievable. And then, just that whole miracle. And how the family all played a role, the sister, the mom, and now you see the restoration. So when you're walking through those tough times, which we all do, and they all look different, our pain is different. And I think the challenge we have for our listeners is, we need to be able to approach people, and we've talked a lot about approach. We need to approach people in their pain with an understanding that pain is real to them. It might seem like it's a minor deal to us, but we have our own pain. So, it's that compassion and kindness that Jesus approached the people with all through his walk of life is the same way we get to do it. So I'm like overwhelmed with just the guest that Papa keeps preparing for us. Can you believe it?
No. I mean, who are we? That we would be able to step into some people's stories and just be able to highlight and point God's miraculous work in each and every one of these stories that we've been blessed with so far. We literally asked ourselves, Dad, back in December, who's going to listen to us? And that's the reminder. So like the same question is, who's going to come and want to share their story on here? But I think, go ahead.
No, we'll get into this in a little bit, but I think it's a reminder to us as well, though, Austin, when we say things like, well, who's going to listen to us? Well, why wouldn't they? We're children of the King. We're sons of God. We're his children that he chose before time began. And he's the one that equipped us with his miraculous inheritance and gifts. And that's the same with our guests, when they come on, those stories are so special. So I think it's fun to watch God put this together. And like you said, it's not us doing it. There's so many areas that I know in my own life that I look at some of these things technologically, and that's where I get challenged. But you've done a great job helping your old dad do this. But and then, like we always say, I don't ever take it for granted, because everything I just said needs to apply in my own life. I not really apply, but needs to come out in my own life. And that is remembering the time me and you get to go do this. This is, hopefully we get to do it for 25 more years, Lord willing, if he wants us to continue and keeps me alive and you alive. But I never take for granted the opportunity for a father and a son to grow each other. Once again, this is the most important thing that I can ever do is help my son grow, and the role you play in my life. So thank you for that as we, do this together.
Oh, absolutely. So, I think back to that first podcast, and, we're talking about building a vault for just our growth. And I can already see 6 months in, the amount of growth that has happened in my life and the stories that, I can share with my children.
And I want to say this to our listeners, and we'll get on to today's topic, is if you have a friend or someone well that you think their story would encourage and uplift and empower our listeners, then please reach out to Austin or I and give us that person's name, and we'll reach out to them, because like we said, every story matters. And we're excited to let people share their hearts with us. So with that said, and let's move on to today. And we want to welcome all of our listeners to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. And alongside me is my son, Austin Karcher, the co-host. Austin, the last time we were together, we continued our discovery into what does it mean to be a kingdom coach. And we looked at the first part of a kingdom coach, which again is process. It's not something that happens overnight, but is that they understand or they start to grasp what their true identity is. And I don't think we can stress that enough. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about identity, and I'll get into that deeper. But, understanding that we are the beloved. And that word beloved is to be loved. That was God's desire from the beginning, is to love us. And that identity is what we can stand on. And it gives us great freedom. We don't have to try to do and live our life for men. We get the opportunity to live from God and who he says we are. Understanding this identity, we talked about it, helps us stand firm in all circumstances. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it's our hope to stand firm in what I think you called it originally the circumstance proof. Regardless of the circumstances, our identity is what keeps us stable. And then the ability to have that grace to fail. Failure is not an endpoint. Failure is just a beginning step to the freedom of growth, which identity allows us to grow when we understand it.
Well, I know this has been review, but I mean, it's important to continually go back. I mean, for weeks now, we've been going through stories, and once again, we're about reminding in the ministry anyway. This is just a reminder of what we've discussed. And, after we talked about, understanding your true identity, the next thing is about learning how to think differently. And once again, it's not us doing it. It's literally, as we understand that identity, which is that he has loved us since the beginning, and he has pursued us, and he has chased us. What happens is when we believe and accept that really gift of his pursuit or his presence or his, chasing of us, it begins to transform and renew our mind. And that is what allows us to think differently. No longer do we think about things like we do in this world, where everything's a transaction, which is basically, if I do this, I expect you to do that. Truly performance, right? He begins to change our mind to something that is not of this world, that is not of this kingdom. It is of his kingdom, which is a transformational mindset, where you look at everything as in process, and you look at things as with great expectancy, because you see things as what they will become when the realization of what everybody has becomes accepted or believed or grasped. And that transformational thinking is different. And the reason it's different is because it's not focused on yourself. It's others-centered. It's about self-giving. It's about shared love. And whose love? Who's the source? It's God's. We're sharing his love with other people. And it's authentic. It's transparent. It's vulnerable, because we trust in the source. We're able to step out of, well, what is someone going to think about me? Because I understand my identity first. That's that whole freedom that we talk about. And then it's restorative, a transformational mind, okay, one that thinks differently, is restorative and helping bring people back to the way everything was intended to be. We're pointing people back to the way things were intended to be, versus punitive, where we're just looking to punish every wrong behavior that occurs. So the second thing that we've discussed about a kingdom coach is there's someone who thinks differently.
Then we got into a couple senses that help us understand the heart better. And we started to talk about kingdom coaches see differently. And the picture I like to use, and you've heard me say it a bunch, is a kingdom coach is a see-througher. They're able to see through people's performances and they recognize growth.
The next one is hear differently. This also helps you understand the heart. And to hear differently, it's about listening, discerning, and understanding that heart. The example you used, Dad, is the Apostle John and him laying the head on Jesus's heart, and just it's trying to get to the heart and understand that person and who they are, and the heart is just is made up of what's going on inside of them. What's going on in their thinking, what's going on in their emotions, and that's what makes up their will, their desires, their heart. And so, someone who is of the kingdom, someone who is a coach from the kingdom or living out of the kingdom, is someone who listens and discerns and understands the heart before they ever try to do the next steps.
And then we addressed one of the last two senses that we think really revive the heart. And the one we've already talked about, and you'll touch on one here in a minute that we'll hit today. But, kingdom coach speak differently. Words matter. And the way we say things, whether it be in our tone or whether it be the exact words we choose, they either build up or tear down, or they breathe life into people or they steal life from people. So kingdom coaches' words are very important.
And the second way, the second sense that can help revive the heart is one that I know, Dad, we initially had nowhere on our radar. But if you think about it, it really does play a role, and it happens almost naturally if you ever watch any type of sport or, people interact here on this earth. But the second sense that is used is in the kingdom, you can touch differently. Touch has got such a negative connotation nowadays because we've distorted it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But touch used with intent to affirm, to unite, and to remind can revive the heart.
Well, as we've done in the past, we're going to take a quick review because, once again, if you have taken any thought about our ministry, then you might have said, wonder why they call it WIN, awakening, and what does WIN stand for? That I is the center of that three-letter word, and it is for identity. And once again, if you have an understanding and you're able to continue to grow in your true identity and you learn to live from that, then life is going to be much more enjoyable, but it's also going to be a life that is lived out of a fullness that you have from Papa. And so what is our true identity? Well, first of all, we need to understand and be willing to accept Papa's opinion. And it goes back to the beginning. We talked about 6 times in Genesis 1, after each moment of creation, he says that it is good. He declares his creation good. And then after he creates man on the 6th day, he declares what he created as very good. So as believers, the question is, do we believe that our starting point is one of good and very good? Papa's opinion, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that he is well pleased, that he delights in us. And so when we start from that position, that he is declared, and it is an actual truth, it's reality. It's not something that just happened a long time ago and it's in the Bible and it's a book. No, it's a reality in our life. This is how Papa thinks about you and me. Well, then we used a the analogy of the NLI. Everyone knows about that in college sports nowadays. It's big news. Everyone's making a bunch of money, and some people think it's going to wreck sports, but we need to go back again to the beginning. This is nothing new. Name, image, and likeness. He tells us in the book of Romans, we are saints. That's a name that some of us don't like to hold on to. We so often are giving ourselves a false identity as sinners, but no, he calls us saints. That's the origination point. That we're chosen. He chose us before time ever began. We've been adopted into his family. But here's the kicker. We are children of God. He tells us in 1 John 3. We're children of God now. We're his beloved sons and daughters, heirs. That's our name, children of God. Pick any of those. Then he talks about the image, which is our true identity. He tells us in 2 Peter that he stamped us with Father's DNA. You and I carry the DNA of the Father. Yeah, I pause. I want you to think about that. That's our image. And then he said that he created us in not only his image, but his likeness. And likeness is that process. It's that growing, sometimes pains. It's that growing expression of this union that we are part of. Likeness means sameness, or maybe the word that we would better understand is more of his character comes out in us. We're his workmanship. So it's his process of time. We're his masterpiece. No one creates a masterpiece in one moment. So it's coming to this understanding that we have been created in his image and likeness, and now we get the opportunity to grow in this likeness. So here's the truth that I would like you to think on. Hopefully you'll never forget name, image, and likeness in the way it really is, not just what we hear in the world. But the truth that I want you to think on is this: the Christian life is a matter of becoming who you already are. Are you willing to accept your acceptance? The Christian life is a matter of becoming who you already are. That's our true identity.
Like I stated a few weeks back, and probably the last two times you and I talked, Dad, the thing that God's really summed it up for me, and I just continue want to hone in and continue to bring to share this truth is our identity. The thing that is our rock that we can hold on to is the fact that he loves us. It's his love. See, everything flows from the source. So our identity flows from the source. That's what gives us identity. It is not just us. It's us believing of what the source has given us. And what he has given, everything from being a child to being an heir to have an inheritance, stems from the truth of who he is. See, our identity is God's love. Every description of our identity is rooted in that truth. See, love is God's identity, and he lavishes his essence on us. Wow. Lavish, you were talking about that. And that's the beauty of our identity, is we can stand firm, because although I by myself can be like a roller coaster, my life, based on what I believe and how I choose to live, right? I can hold on to something that is an eternal rock that does not move, does not change. And what is that? It's his love. So what are some verses that continue to talk about this truth? Well, the first one, obviously, is we got to identify God's essence, or Jesus' essence and the Spirit's essence. It's 1 John 4:8. Whoever does not love does not know God. When, Dad, that known, that intimate know? It says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. That's his identity. That's who he is. Now, he might manifest his love differently based on our needs, but who he is love, and we got to start from that point, that truth.
Mm.
The next thing that I've definitely referenced, but I think it's important just to read the verse, is Romans 8:37 through 39. It says, "No, in all these things we are more than conquerors." That's an identity. That's an identity. More than conquerors through him who loved us. How are we conquerors? Through him who loved us. That's our source. That's our rock. "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." So what can separate us from his love? Now, experience is different. We need to believe this truth to experience it. But as far as his love and what he's lavishing and what he's giving, nothing can separate us from that truth.
You know, Austin, it makes me think about, and this is another whole topic, but just, you know, we're so focused on separation in our world. That's in our minds. It talks all through Romans. We've been separated in our minds. Notice it's our minds, like you just said. It's not his mind. There's nothing. And I don't know what other word we can use to describe that. There's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. That is such an encouragement and offers great comfort to be able to believe that truth.
It's funny, Dad, you brought that up, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but this is just an example. We have a dog, my family, and yesterday I was home because I'm in the middle of transitioning jobs, and I have the dog in the house, and her name's Ruthie. She's just laying out in the living room, and I call her to come sit by me at my desk while I'm working. And, we've initially taught her, don't come in our room. That was the thing that we taught her. So we initially did teach that. That's not really the point. But the point was I kept saying, "Ruthie, Ruthie," and she would come all the way to the edge of the door. All the way to the edge of the door. And then she would stop. And I'd say, "Ruthie, come here, come here, come here." And then point to the ground and tell her to come lay by me. And she would not. And because she was going back to, obviously what we were trained, which is not the point that I'm trying to get to. But what she was is she didn't trust that I wanted her right there with me. So she stayed separate from, in the other room, sitting and watching and laying while I sat here, offering her to come be with me. And I think, sadly, that's what God has done. Not the part that, taught her about not coming in the room, but saying, "Hey, I want you to come be with me. I want you to come sit with me." And we just stay at a distance because we feel like, I don't know if, I'm supposed to or I'm not, so it can warp our view of, obviously I'm not God, but our view of God determines, how our relationship and whether we stay separate or we come and sit at the feet of Papa, would be the example that I was thinking of when you brought that up. But anyways, back to the verses. We got John 3:16. All right. It says, "For God so loves the world." That's everybody. The world encompasses everybody. "That he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." So once again, his love is the thing that is demonstrated through sending his Son. And then it's about whoever believes is the one that experiences life and experiences that truth of his love. And then Romans 5:8, it says, "But God demonstrated his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So once again, his love was the same when we were sinners and when Jesus died and removed our sin. And that's the beauty of his love, is it, as we get different labels here on earth, because there is still sin here on this earth, those don't change his opinion or his perception. His love is always going to be constant and hold true. We just have to believe in his love for us. He doesn't love us because of our performance. He loves us because it's his identity. We can experience life when we believe in the truth that we are his beloved. He has and will take care of whatever obstacle stands in our way. I just have to trust, believe that his love was and is greater than all things. That includes our performance, sin, and death.
Well, hopefully, as our listeners mull that over in their mind about what our true identity is and who it comes from, once again, it's life-changing. Our concept of who God is and our identity in him that is from him is how we live out this Christian life here in the kingdom now. And so hopefully that'll be encouraging. So let's go to our sixth statement of what a kingdom coach looks like, or what does it mean to be a kingdom coach. And you mentioned that the word touch. So we're going to talk about what is touch in the kingdom. I went back and tried to define some of these things, and I broke it up with the Old Testament, Old Covenant versus the New Testament, New Covenant. God's touch in Hebrew is a word naga, N-A-G-A, and we look at God's touch as all-powerful. Power over the created world. If you go back to Genesis 1, we see what? Creation was spoken into existence, right? God spoke, it said 6 times. In this process of his image to likeness, and how he is taking us from his created image, that DNA that we've been stamped with, into growing in likeness or character here day to day. And Genesis 2:7 shows us the picture of him breathing his life into us. And then you look at Genesis 2:21 and 22, and it gives us this picture of shaping. It's God touch, his hands shaping these lives that we all have. Another word is molded. I think back to when you used to have that on your license plate. So here's these pictures God gives us. He's shaping us in his hands. He's molding us. He lifts us up and he dresses us as men and women, sons and daughters. So the touch of God goes all the way back to the beginning when he creates us. We're created beings that he shapes and molds, lifts up, builds up, dresses. So he is our protector, our creator. Then there was the story in Genesis 32, very familiar story about when Jacob wrestles with God. And I think all of us are probably thinking, I can remember those nights or days or moments that I'm working through something where it feels like I'm wrestling with God. And we're trying to, hold on to maybe an identity, which is what Jacob was holding on to, right? He was a deceiver, a liar, and he was holding on to this false identity after he tricked Esau. Well, then we see this picture in this wrestling match between Jacob, and they said it's some man, but as it comes out, he's wrestling with God, and he submits finally as God touches his hip. He submits to God and who God really wanted him to become and be, and that was where he has the name changed to Israel. We know the story of how Israel influences the rest of the world up until now. And so, there's a picture of God's touch in someone's life. And sometimes it's through a wrestling match that we're going through in our life. So in those times where maybe we're wrestling, let's be aware of God's touch in those moments in our life. And then what is Papa's divine touch? What are some things that it does? Well, I'm not going to go through each of these passages, but number one, it turns people to him. His touch, as we look through scripture in 1 Samuel 10, it turns people to him. What else does his touch do? His touch purifies them from sin in Isaiah 6. He touches their lips and purifies them from sin. His touches also imparts divine truth through them. Jeremiah 1:9 tells us that. So Papa's divine touch is something that influenced many, many people all through the Old Testament. Now we go to the New Testament and we take a look at Jesus and the power of touch. The Greek word is hapto, H-A-P-T-O. And we see Jesus's touch as all powerful. And there's a couple Greek expressions that follow this up. It's to touch is to take by hand or to lay hand upon. And we'll see this all through scripture. We see Jesus's touch and power over nature. We see it over sickness, and we see it over even death. Twice, Jesus's touch multiplied enough food with his hands to feed thousands. We all know the story of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. His touch cured people of various infirmities and restored life to death. Then there was all these pictures of touch, right? The man with leprosy, the mother-in-law that had the extended fever, all the many sick people throughout the New Testament, 2 dead children he brings back to life. The blind man, or blind men, I should say, is multiple. A deaf, mute man. The touch of a boy that had an evil spirit. A crippled woman. A servant with a severed ear. Those who touched his clothes. Not only was his touch powerful in changing people's lives, it was just someone touching his cloak that changed her life. So the power of touch in the kingdom, as we started out, you said it, Austin, I was like, man, what are we going to talk about for 45 minutes to an hour and a half on touch? And it just kept coming out over and over and over. And it says in Mark chapter 6, verse 56, this was the verse to me that really jumped out. It says, as many as touched him, they were made whole. And as I started to think about that more and more with our, again, when the W is wholeness, and we've talked about, wholeness is when the truth of your being matches the ways of your being. Well, God's touch in each of our lives helps us in our journey to that wholeness. That's his desire, to bring people back to the original blueprint, the original design of wholeness, living from a place of wholeness. It's not just an intellectual assent of knowledge that, oh yeah, I'm whole, or this is my identity. That's the step I'm hoping we're taking with one another in our own families, but then our listeners. These truths are realities that can be lived out day to day that change our life. They're not just in our heads. So what was Jesus's approach? We've been talking about approach, right? Well, one, he showed compassion. If you look at all these times he's touching people, it talks about he had a compassion for them. And it's a faith in his faith that heals these people. It's not a faith that we have to muster up. It's not our faith. We see in the scripture, it talks about, and I've been really dwelling on this for my own growth, it's faith to faith. Well, it's his faith that our faith generates from. So 3 aspects of Jesus's touch that I want to leave our listeners with and then give them a quick story is, number 1 is intimacy. His touch is about intimacy. His desire to be involved in someone's life. It shows that, right? His touch is a picture of dominion. He has authority to deliver people from darkness, not just in the Bible, but now. I know that's one prayer of mine every day. I want to experience what he has shown me in my mind, in my heart. I want to experience it more each day. And then his touch is transformational. He takes away the sin and he cleanses us. Jesus often starts with miracles with some form of touch. His miracles usually start with some form of touch. So if touch precedes miracles, think about that in our life now. Touch precedes miracles. So when I'm going to leave it at that for you to dwell on. Let me interrupt you for a moment. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have to do this podcast with my son, Austin. For the last 10 years, Austin and I have had many intimate conversations on his drive home from work. Some of these father-son conversations have been lighthearted, while others have been very deep and emotional. Over the Christmas holidays, we decided to start a podcast called Awaken Kingdom Culture, where we invite our friends to share their life-changing stories with you, our listeners. This podcast is done under our nonprofit, The Win Awakening, a sports ministry network for coaches, athletes, and those who lead. Our vision is to awaken hearts and minds, one story at a time. Our mission is to encourage coaches and athletes and those who lead to live from a place of victory, regardless of success, records, or the scoreboard. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. Right in the middle of your mess, I'm reminded daily that the most important person of my day is the one in front of me, and that one matters, and that you are the one. WinAwakening.org is our website. I encourage you to visit our website where you can encounter the good news of who you are in Christ and what you already possess and how to live from it. There you'll find blogs, videos, Andrew's journal, and this podcast, Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. I'm thankful for all of you who have given and are a member of Team Win. Awaken Kingdom Culture is listener supported. And if you'd like to support us, you can go to winawakening.org. We are a nonprofit. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And please like, share, and write a review on Spotify or YouTube. Okay, it's time to get back to the podcast. And then again, we've already talked about some of the examples, but Mark 5, we see the healing of the leper, right? That's someone that he should not be going to. Think of the lepers in our lives. Healing a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, that's not someone he's supposed to be dealing with. Or bringing a little girl back from the dead. That's the power of touch. There's 3 basic needs that all of us are born with: the desire to be loved, accepted, and valued. Christ is the one that meets those needs. Think about a baby. It's called the Moro reflex. When a baby is born and a mother puts their hands on the baby, have you ever noticed what the baby does? It's called the Moro reflex. The baby springs its arms open, extended fingers. And what is it basically saying? Hold me. Pull me close. Hug me. This is how we walk through life. Because again, we all want to be loved, valued, and accepted. Deep in the core of our being, that's what we think about. It might come out in your job. You might have a job, and from a performance perspective, you want to be what? You want to be valued. You want to be accepted. Well, that goes back to the beginning. We were created to be able to be loved, valued, and accepted. And one of the ways we experience that is by the touch of Papa and his beloved Son, Christ Jesus.
That's beautiful. Unfortunately, we're going to move to halftime, Dad, and we're going to talk about the distortion of touch. See, although touch was created for the purpose of restoring, healing, and reviving the mind and heart, the world has distorted and perverted God's beautiful gift. So much so that we either misuse it, ignore it, or avoid it altogether because it's just such a touchy subject, right? So the first question is, how has touch been distorted?
One of the ways that I thought about was revenge. You know, we live in a world where we want to judge and get revenge, and that's the opposite of protection. That's an exact opposite of what I just talked about. Instead of protection, we want to, it's preventing harm, we say. And harm is hurting, injuring, killing people. The example of Cain and Abel, right? Out of anger that occurred.
Yep. The next way that, touch has been distorted is just disrespect. It's a lack of respect for other people. Obviously that can happen in a number of different ways, but we're focusing on physically. The opposite of disrespect would be to be respectful or to respect someone. Where if disrespect is a lack of respect, respect is considering others' traditions, rights, feelings, and desires. See, a lot of times we just we can use touch to invade personal space, which there is a time to touch, but we got to think about, when is the right time, right? There's an untimely and an unwanted touch. Also there's negative messages that are sent through touch that are disrespectful. You could be pushing, shoving, okay, which is like separating, trying to get someone away from you. Striking, slapping, where you're trying to hurt or harm someone. Or even spitting, like just to devalue or to completely disrespect that person. See, how is this shown up in the Bible? Some of the distortion. Well, go to the Via Dolorosa, right? It's the sorrowful way, or the way of suffering. That's when Jesus was walking to the cross. How did they distort touch to hurt or to disrespect? Well, Jesus was forced to carry a cross. He had to touch and hold and carry a heavy cross. He was pushed and shoved along the way. He was struck across the face when he was sitting in front of the high priest and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He was slapped and spit on. He was completely disrespected, and we're sitting talking about the Son of the living God. The next thing is abuse. The next way that we distort it, and it's when you treat with cruelty and violence. Once again, we're thinking from a physical abuse, right? There's many types of abuse, but because we're talking about touch, we're looking at it from the lens of physically. Well, what is the opposite of abuse? Well, it's to care. That means to meet someone's needs. Abuse could create fear. It can hurt, injure, bully, or even torture someone. Sadly, it happens just straight up physically, or it can even sexually, sadly, nowadays. Since the beginning of time. An example of this distortion just in the Bible is, once again, Jesus was beaten, abused, he was beaten, he was whipped, he put on a crown of thorns where he was bleeding, he was nailed on the cross, he was stabbed at the end. And then there's also the story in Judges 19 about the Levite and his concubine, where a bunch of people were, there, he had, I think it was an angel or someone was visiting this Levite, and some perverted men were trying to take that man and do with what they wanted with him physically. And so what ends up happening is they get the concubine, and the concubine, they basically abuse her sexually, and they beat her and they hurt her, and then they send her away, and she ends up dying at the doorsteps of this Levite. Well, obviously there's historical stuff that happens in Israel that I'm not trying to get into, but there's stories of physical abuse all throughout the Bible that that touch has been misused or distorted to hurt and to harm individuals.
Another form of that abuse is neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Neglect is another form of just failing to care physically. It's the opposite of caring, and it's not meeting someone's needs, but it's doing it in a way that they're not involved in someone's life. There's no proximity. There isn't that closeness or that touch. And you see that, unfortunately, today, you see that a lot with children. As I just gave the example of the Morrow effect, we need to be touched and loved and held and hugged. And sometimes kids are growing up without that.
Yeah.
Another example in scripture is leprosy, right? Someone had leprosy. No one wanted to touch or go near them. So neglect is something that can really harm somebody.
So why has touch been distorted and perverted? Well, first off, it goes to touch has become selfish, as opposed to what it was created for, selfless, where you deny yourself and try to help another individual. See, we have distorted touch for our own purposes. We have selfish motives. We think about it. Let's think about it. I mean, it's revenge. Why do we use touch for revenge? To make someone feel the way I feel. Why do we use touch to disrespect? Because I want to prioritize my wants over another's wants. Abuse, because I want to create authority, power, dominance, and pleasure for myself. And then neglect, because sometimes I stay away from people, and showing love is because I want to protect myself. In the story of the leprosy, people, wanted nothing to do with a person who was leprous because they didn't want to join in their suffering.
So what's the kingdom perspective on this distortion, Austin? Let's look at a couple of these.
I once again, these are tough things to talk about, but we're talking about another kingdom. That's what this whole awakened kingdom culture is about, right? There's a different way of doing life, and in touch, there's a different way to touch. Matthew 5:38-39 says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth." So that's the thinking of the world, right? "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn them to the other cheek also." So turn the other cheek. Obviously, there's a physical touch in this. Okay, it's turning and saying, okay, here's my other cheek as well.
In Romans 12, we see that a passage that a lot of people use, and I think it's really misused, quite frankly. They talk about, our role is not to take revenge. We're not in that judgment mode. It's, you talked about editing what people say a couple of weeks ago. That's not our role. Our role is to love people because, again, God is love. He's in us, and we are a product of him. So we are love. And it's he that'll work with people, and it's him that'll change their lives. And it's Christ that'll go into those areas of their life that maybe are not pleasing to him or uncomfortable areas to deal with. It's not our role.
Matthew 26:67-68. It says, "Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, 'Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?' So once again, you got to remember who Jesus was, the Son of God, right? And yet he's getting struck in the face, hit with a fist, slapped him, and they're mocking him. And he endures humbly. That's a kingdom call, is to endure, okay, hard situations, physically, to show people the kingdom, his kingdom.
Another kingdom call is submitting to authority. And that's a real challenge in our society today. There's very few authority figures that are respected or look up to. And we could talk about that on its own podcast. But our role is to submit to those that Papa has put us under, whether it be an employer, whether it be a husband-wife marriage between each other, whether it be children. Submitting to authority is a positive thing and is set up for our own growth and our own well-being.
Romans 8:2-3. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Don't neglect the unclean. Because of what Christ has done, he has made all things clean. Everything has been given in full. We need to view people differently so that we can go meet people in their mess, because we got our own mess, and trust that God will show up. The next thing is, we're called to deny ourselves. That means turning the other cheek. That's hard to do. Okay. Letting God, control what a person needs, enduring tough times, submit to authority, go to the unclean. These are calls to deny what we're taught and trained in this world, to be selfish, to think about ourselves, to fight back for what is ours. We're in the kingdom, we're called to deny ourselves. That means we're denying our feelings, our wants, our authority, power, dominion, pleasure, and protection. See, what it is it's really a lack of patience, trust, and perspective to let God take care of our needs. In the kingdom, that's how the kingdom functions. It's complete dependency on God. We have turned this thing into this worldly kingdom where we're very selfish and we feel like I'm the one that has to meet my needs of protection, of wants, of authority, of power, dominion, all that stuff. But not in the kingdom. We have a good Father who is there ready to provide for what we need if we let him.
Once again, it's back to, you can't get around it. It's back to identity. All those things that you just talked about that are kingdom call, they're impossible unless we're living from our true identity, that we are lovers of people. And so our focus on knowing who we are and what we already possess and learning to live from that reality, that's where life changes. That's where the kingdom becomes a reality now. So we talked about the distortions, and now we're going to talk about the importance of touch in sports. I mean, we are talking about kingdom coaches, right? And what does it look like as a kingdom coach, a kingdom leader? And so how does touch show up on the fields and the courts, from a coach to another coach, a coach to a player? So I was able to come across an article or two, and one of this article gave some information, give credit to Red Fame Publishing, and it just talked about the importance of touch in sport and the messages that are communicated. So here's a couple benefits, and these are things we all know, but I just want to refresh our memory, maybe in case we forgot. Benefits of a human touch: it gives reassurance to the person you've touched. It shows empathy. It gives comfort. It is, again, a picture of love. It shows compassion. And it also shows that you can relate to possibly someone's sadness. These examples or benefits of human touch. And we want to just share with you some examples of the messages that can be sent through touch.
Some of those examples, the first one being touch has a purpose. It has an intent. A negative way is to manipulate. In sport, a lot of time it's to cause harm. It's a harmful influence to get what you want. But touch can also be very positive. And one of those things is it can have the intent of motivating.
Yes.
Think about high fives, fist bumps, chest bumps, hugs. I mean, we don't think about it, but it happens all the time in sports anyway, a lot of times.
Yes.
You score a touchdown, someone gives a chest bump, or you get a first down, you go and high five the buddy, or you give a fist bump when they're coming over the sideline, or you give them a big hug when they, get the game-winning touchdown. I mean, these are all things that if they're used with purpose and intent, they can really build up a person or a team and unite a team. Another example of messages sent through touch is to affirm. It could look like a pat on the back, like that makes you feel good. It validates and creates confidence. It could be a handshake, just a solid handshake, like I respect or am encouraged by what you've just done. Unity is another thing that is an example of a message that can be sent. Think about it. I mean, I was teaching our little flag football team the other day. We're going to put our hands in together because we're a bunch of individuals coming together under one team, under one name. And we're going to put our hands together and we're going to break down together. So, or, you see teams on the sideline holding hands, right, before the coin toss. Hey, we're united, we're one. Or hands on the shoulder. These are things that unite and say, we're together in this. And these are things that show up in sport, but they're of the kingdom. And then to remind that I'm present, that there's always hope, and you're not alone. Hands, holding hands, or arms on the shoulder, saying you are not alone. When there's poor performance, there's reassurance, consolation, and comfort, saying, maybe I don't have the words to say, because remember, we talked about speaking differently. Well, sometimes speaking, it's not the right time to speak. Sometimes touch can be the thing that encourages in that moment as you wait for the appropriate time to speak.
We talked about this falls under that area with speaking and touch is ways to revive a person's heart. Well, some of the reasons for touch, they enhance the emotional well-being of an athlete as well. Physiologically, it can motivate or pump up. It's a way of affirmation to praise somebody. Like you said, it builds unity. It's that cohesion, bonding, connection that you feel when you have that touch. And like you said, it's to remind. So it really enhances, touch can enhance the emotional well-being of an athlete rather than feeling separated or distant. There's three types of hormones that are released when someone touches with another person. There's the bonding hormone of oxytocin. There's the feel-good hormones of dopamine or serotonin. And there's that stress-reducing hormone of cortisol or norepinephrine. Pronounced that wrong, beat that up, but those that are doctors will know what I'm talking about. But touch releases these hormones that, again, we don't think about. And then there's it enhances and affects the behavioral, right? When you touch someone, it can be a way of positive reinforcement. Or maybe, like you said, it's a use of instruction. It drives me crazy when I'm watching my grandson play Little League baseball. And it's the same with watching Abel and them with their football. It's hard for them to grasp that they're going to turn sideways and be looking at an angle away from where you are or where they're going to throw or hit the ball. And so you go up and you grab them by the hips and you say, no, this is how you stand, and you separate their feet properly. Well, there's that touch of instruction. Or maybe it's the touch to help someone focus. These are behavioral adjustments. Then there's safety, right? When a trainer comes running out on the field and they're looking to assess an injury, they're touching the body part that's injured. Or maybe harm prevention, right? You got a little child that wants to run out on the street and cross the road, and you grab them by the arm. That's a safety touch. And then there's all kind of sport-specific cultural, touches that are specific to what you might be doing. So the role of touch in the life of someone in the world of sports or just in society in general, but again, we're talking about coaches, and the importance of touch in sport is really remarkable.
Yeah. So, a kingdom coach touches differently. So a kingdom coach touches with appropriate intent. I say appropriate because, like we said, our world has distorted touch and the view of touch. So of the kingdom, there's an appropriate intent to the reason why you're touching. It's someone who understands the physiological and behavioral and safety and cultural benefits that come from touch. His intent as a kingdom coach is to teach his team how to use touch to motivate, affirm, unite, and remind. He sees and hears his players because he wants to understand their heart. He then speaks and touches with appropriate intent to draw out and revive. He speaks and touches out of love, compassion, and mercy, and assumes all risk. He communicates grace and hope for the benefit of others, not just himself. One of the things that made me think of this, Dad, when we were going through a kingdom coach, it actually brought me back to a story about you, which you might not even know about. I don't know. But, you were a junior college coach and you guys played on Thursday nights. And I play on Friday nights as a high school coach. So I couldn't make it to Decatur, Mississippi. So I had to watch. I'm one of 10 viewers on a live stream on the computer. Well, I can remember watching you guys play a team that was probably well favored, and you guys took them down to the wire, and you took them down to the end of the game. And you're going in, I think you're marching in to score, and your quarterback makes a decision that ends up being the final play that, broke the straw of the camel's back. He didn't lose the game, but he was a part of the end of the game. And I can remember him, one second, my thing's about to die. Let me charge it real quick.
I remember that game. It's bringing back some heartache there, but go ahead. I'll let you.
But that player, he basically, you could tell he's just heartbroken, and you can see on the screen that he's just beating himself up. And I can remember you walking over there, and I could see it on the screen as if it was yesterday. You put your arm around him. And I can just get in the picture, at least what God spoke to me was, you joined in that person's suffering, and as I could just think of fans thinking all these bad things about this one particular player in that moment, or teammates thinking that, you joined in that and said, I'm with you. You're not alone. And I want you to know that you're more, than your performance. And like you've always said, that is the greatest thing a coach can do. The greatest thing a coach can do, because that keeps that player or that person keep going. Because when they keep going and there's that hope, you know, you revive their heart, and that allows them to go and, you know, perform well next time, or, you know, they may struggle next time. They keep moving, which allows opportunities for God to show up and do some great things through individuals when they are resilient and able to bounce back. And sometimes they just need that person to remind them of these truths in the midst of their suffering or struggle or pain or whatever you want to say. Because a kingdom coach speaks and touches with intent to revive the heart of the people around him. That's what he does. That's what we were put on this earth, is to bring the kingdom here on earth. Because we were called to be transformed by what God is doing, and then let him flow out of us. And by him flowing out of us, we understand people's hearts by the way we see and the way we hear. And then we use our other senses, such as the way we speak out of our mouth or the way we touch, to revive people's hearts. That's the kingdom coach to me.
You know, some people, again, might be hearing that word kingdom and they're wondering, what does that really mean? Because sometimes kingdom is like, well, that's up there. And I just want to remind them, you know, the definition that we have settled on is kingdom is Christ-centered dominion in all aspects of life. And so maybe you're sitting there right now as a listener and you're thinking about touch, and you're thinking about this whole concept of kingdom coach, identity, transformational thinking, how I'm listening, the way that I communicate, or how I look at things. And then touch. Well, here's what I thought about as I close us today. I want to read a portion of scripture to you. It's very familiar to all of us, but hopefully you'll hear, see, think, feel, and listen differently than you ever have before. I hope if you're sitting there at maybe your desk at work, or you're in your car driving home, or maybe you're sitting with your loved one, I hope you'll feel Papa's touch, that his arm will be around you as I read this to you. Psalm 139 says this: you know all about me. Lord, you know everything there is to know about me. You perceive every movement of my heart and soul. Perceive. And you understand my every thought before it enters my mind. You're so intimately aware of me. You read my heart like an open book, and you know all the words I'm about to speak before I ever start a sentence. You know every step I'll take before my journey ever begins. You've gone into my future to prepare the way, and in kindness you follow behind me, to spare me from the harm of my past. With your hand of love upon my life, that touch, you impart a blessing to me. This is just too wonderful, deep, and incomprehensible. Your understanding of me brings me wonder and strength. Where could I go from your spirit? Where could I run and hide from your heart? If I go up to heaven, you're there. If I go down to the realm of the dead, you're there too. If I fly with wings into the stunning dawn, you're there. If I fly into the radiant sunset, you're there waiting. Wherever I go, your hand will guide me. Your strength will empower me. It's impossible to disappear from you or to ask the darkness to hide me, for your presence is everywhere, bringing light into my night. There's no such thing as darkness with you. The night to you is as bright as the sky. There's no difference between the two. You formed, there's that shaping. You formed my innermost being, shaping my delicate inside and my intricate outside, and wove them all together in my mother's womb. I thank you, God, for making me so mysterious complex. Everything you do is marvelously breathtaking. It simply amazes me to think about it. How thoroughly you know me, Lord. You even formed every bone in my body when you created me in the secret place, carefully, skillfully shaping me from nothing to somebody. You saw who you created me to be before I became me. Before I'd ever seen the light of day, the number of days you planned for me, you already recorded in your book. Every single moment you are thinking of me. How precious and wonderful to consider that you cherish me constantly in every thought. So I hope as you've listened today that you can sense the touch of our loving Papa as he wraps his arms around you and says, I got you. Mm. Thanks for being a part of our time together with Austin and I at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.